Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever found yourself apologizing for something she did? Not because you were guilty, but because somehow the conversation flipped. One moment you're confused, the next you're reassuring her. And by the end, you're questioning yourself. If that sounds familiar, listen carefully, because what you experienced wasn't chaos. It wasn't random emotion, and it definitely wasn't love. It was guilt leaving footprints. Most men miss this because they're taught to listen to words, but guilt doesn't speak clearly. It leaks. And today I'm going to show you 5 guilt-driven behaviors women cannot control after they cheat. Not so you become paranoid, but so you stop being pulled into emotional loops that were never yours to carry. Once you see these patterns, you won't be confused again. The big lie most men believe. Men assume guilt works the same way for everyone. If someone does something wrong, they confess, they explain, they apologize. That's how men tend to process guilt, through words. Women process guilt very differently. They don't release it, they restructure it. Here's why. When a woman cheats, the problem isn't just the act, it's the internal conflict it creates. She doesn't see herself as the kind of woman who betrays. That clashes with her identity, and the brain will do almost anything to protect identity. So instead of destroying her self-image, her mind compensates. This is called identity dissonance. Her actions say one thing, her self-image says another, and guilt becomes pressure. Pressure that has to go somewhere. So it moves. What you are actually seeing. This is the part most men never understand. You're not dealing with a woman who suddenly became irrational. You're watching a mind under self-protective stress. Guilt doesn't make her weak. It makes her reactive. It bends behavior. It distorts emotional flow. And if you don't recognize the pattern, you become the safest place for that pressure to land. That's why the emotional swings feel so confusing. Sweet, then cold. Calm, then explosive. Apologetic, then accusatory. It feels personal, but it's not about you. It's about internal damage control. Let this sink in. You are not witnessing mystery. You are witnessing compensation. And compensation always leaves patterns. Why men get trapped. Here's where men get pulled into the wrong role. You try to stabilize the situation, you try to be understanding, you try to communicate, you try to fix the emotional chaos. But when guilt is involved, fixing becomes fuel. Because the moment you absorb her emotional weight, she doesn't have to carry it. And guilt hates being carried by the person who caused it. So it looks for somewhere else to live. Often in you. That's why men end up exhausted, confused, and self-blaming. Not because they're weak, but because they're unaware of the psychological exchange happening. Setting the frame for what comes next. In the next part, I'm going to break down the first 2 signs of uncontrollable guilt. They're subtle. They're misleading. And most men misinterpret them as affection or mood swings. But once you understand what they really mean, the emotional fog clears. Before we continue, I want you to reflect on one question. Have you ever felt emotionally punished without knowing what crime you committed? If that question hits, you're exactly where you need to be. Now we move from theory to patterns you can feel in real life. These are not dramatic signs. They are subtle, and that's exactly why they work. Let's start with the one that fools most men. Sign number 1, overcompensation. Sudden, unnatural sweetness. This is the sign men want to believe is love. Sudden warmth, extra affection, unexpected tenderness. She becomes attentive again, initiates closeness, says things she hasn't said in a long time. and you think, maybe things are finally getting better. But here's what's really happening. This isn't love increasing. This is moral balancing. When someone does something they internally judge as wrong, the brain tries to restore balance, not by admitting the truth, but by overcorrecting behavior. Good actions to cancel bad ones. That's why the sweetness feels off, too fast, too intense, too disconnected from what actually happened. Let me give you a familiar scenario. She's hard to reach over the weekend, slow replies, vague explanations. Then suddenly, Monday comes. She's perfect, caring, affectionate, almost trying to make up for something without saying what. And your nervous system feels it. Something doesn't align. That's because overcompensation doesn't come from desire. It comes from conscience management. Here's how you recognize it. Affection spikes without a natural buildup. Warmth feels performative, not grounded. Emotional energy underneath feels tense or distant. On the surface, it looks like love. Underneath, it feels cold. And that contrast is the tell. Let this land. This isn't intimacy. This is pressure wrapped in affection. When you mistake guilt-driven sweetness for love, you lower your guard, and that's exactly why it appears first. Why this confuses men. Men are taught to respond positively to affection. So when she becomes sweet again, you relax, you stop questioning, you stop noticing inconsistencies. You tell yourself you are overthinking. But guilt doesn't disappear when you accept the affection. It just changes shape. And when overcompensation stops working, it turns into something else. Which brings us to the second sign. Sign number 2, emotional displacement, irrational irritability toward you. This one hurts more because it feels personal. Suddenly she's irritated by small things, neutral questions, harmless comments. You say something normal and she snaps. The intensity doesn't match the situation, and you're left thinking, what did I do this time? Here's what's actually happening. Guilt creates internal pressure. Pressure looks for release, and it almost always gets displaced onto the safest target. That target is usually you. Not because you deserve it, but because you're emotionally available. This is called emotional displacement. Instead of confronting what she did, her mind redirects discomfort outward. So you become the problem. Let me be very clear here. She's not angry at you. She's angry at the mirror you represent. Your presence reminds her of who she believes she is and what she knows she did. That creates friction, and friction demands an outlet. That's why small issues trigger big reactions. Neutral questions feel accusatory to her. You're punished emotionally without context. And the moment you defend yourself, you validate the shift. Now she's justified in her irritation. Now you're the problem. Here's the key insight most men miss. She needs you to become the issue so she doesn't have to face the truth. Once that happens, the emotional balance flips. She feels lighter, you feel heavier. And if you're not careful, you start carrying guilt that was never yours. Up to this point, notice something critical. Neither of these signs involve confession. No honesty, no clarity, just behavior, because guilt doesn't want resolution, it wants relief. And relief comes from transfer. Before we continue, I want you to reflect quietly on this. Have you experienced sudden affection, followed by unexplained irritation? If yes, don't jump to conclusions. Just recognize the pattern. In part 3, we're going to cover the final 3 signs. And this is where things become impossible to ignore. Defensive overreactions that expose fear. Sudden repair mode that looks mature but isn't. And the most dangerous one, confessions that leave you apologizing. And then the twist. Why guilt doesn't weaken her, but turns you into the emotional dumping ground. Now we reach the signs that most men feel but try hardest to explain away. These are the moments where guilt becomes impossible to contain, and where men, without realizing it, get pulled into carrying emotional weight that was never theirs. Let's continue. Sign number 3, defensive overreaction, fear disguised as anger. This is where things escalate quickly. You ask a simple question, not an accusation, not an interrogation, just curiosity. And suddenly, everything explodes. She becomes defensive, her tone sharpens, the conversation turns hostile. You're accused of being insecure, controlling, paranoid, and you're left stunned thinking, I didn't even say anything wrong. That reaction is not about the question. It's about threat sensitivity. When someone is hiding something, even neutral inquiries feel dangerous. Not because of what you asked, but because of what it could lead to. So her nervous system reacts before logic does. Overreaction becomes a shield. Here's how you recognize it. Long explanations you didn't ask for. Sudden emotional intensity. Body tension, avoidance of eye contact. Turning the focus onto your character. And here's the insight most men miss. Someone with nothing to hide does not react like they've been cornered. Defensiveness isn't proof. But disproportionate defensiveness is a signal, and signals matter more than words. Sign number 4, sudden repair mode, panic disguised as maturity. This one confuses intelligent men. Because on the surface, it looks healthy. She suddenly wants to talk, wants to reconnect, wants to fix things. She suggests quality time, maybe even therapy. She speaks calmly, softly, and you think, finally, growth. But look closer. This repair mode doesn't come with clarity. It comes with urgency. The words are right, but they're vague. I just want us to be okay. I don't want to lose you. Let's move forward. Notice what's missing? Specifics, accountability, root causes. This isn't reconciliation, it's damage control. When guilt spikes, the priority becomes self-preservation, not truth, not repair, just stabilization. She's trying to secure the relationship so she doesn't have to confront what destabilized it. Here's the pattern. Emotional softness appears suddenly. Pressure to move on quickly. Apologies without depth. Focus on the future. Avoidance of the past. And here's the key distinction. Real repair creates clarity. Guilt-driven repair creates confusion. One strengthens trust. The other freezes the conversation in place. Sign number 5. Guilt-shifting confession. Honesty that leaves you carrying the weight. This is the most dangerous sign because it looks like truth. She confesses, partially. She admits something happened. But notice what happens next. The story centers on her emotions, her confusion, her pain, her loneliness. And before you realize it, you're comforting her. You're reassuring her. You're managing her distress. Your hurt becomes secondary. This is called emotional inversion. The roles flip. She may say sorry, but the emotional burden ends up in your hands. Here's how you recognize it. Confession mixed with justification. Emphasis on how hard it was for her. subtle implication that circumstances caused it. You leaving the conversation feeling guilty for reacting. Let this sink in. A real confession brings relief and clarity. A manipulative confession leaves confusion and imbalance. Truth sets weight down. Manipulation redistributes it. If you walk away feeling responsible for someone else's betrayal, something went wrong. Now here's the twist most men never see. Guilt does not weaken her. It redirects. And if you're emotionally open, empathetic, and reactive, you become the safest place for that guilt to land. Not because you deserve it, but because you can carry it. That's the trap. And the moment you stop absorbing it, the entire cycle collapses. Because guilt cannot survive without a host. What to do instead? Actionable, grounded. This is not about confrontation. It's about posture. Here's what actually works. Maintain emotional distance. Ask neutral, specific questions. Don't argue against accusations. Observe them. Don't accept guilt that isn't yours. Set clear boundaries without drama. Silence is powerful here. So is calm. When you stop reacting emotionally, the pattern loses momentum, and what's real has no choice but to surface. Let's bring this together. The 5 uncontrollable guilt signs. 1. Sudden, unnatural sweetness. 2. Irrational irritability. 3. Defensive overreaction. 4. Panic-driven repair mode. 5. Confession that shifts emotional weight. Remember this. Don't listen for explanations. Watch for patterns. And understand this one truth deeply. Harmony without clarity is not peace. It's control. If this video helped you name something you felt but couldn't explain, comment below. Like and share this so other men stop blaming themselves for damage they didn't create. And subscribe if you want to understand the psychology behind behaviors, not just the words people use to hide them. Because clarity doesn't come from accusation. It comes from awareness.